Hello. I normally make podcasts rather, about other things, storytelling and psychology and sociology and religious studies and all sorts of things like that. But having been a lifelong fan of Doctor Who since I was a very small child, I've not only loved watching Doctor Who, well, something used to. But also started getting interested in listening to other people making various podcasts about Doctor Who, what they like about it, with where they think the show's going really well, where they think it's going really badly, all of that sort of thing. And so I thought I'd have a bit of a crack at making a podcast on that subject myself for the first time, possibly the last time if it may well be something that absolutely nobody else is interested in, but we'll give it a try. And I am indeed wearing, if you can say that, my or one of my Doctor Who t-shirts, just to get into the mood. So rather than having a generic ramble, because I've done a few blog posts around Doctor Who, but kind of talking about sort of imagery, metaphor, um, psychological, sociological issues within Doctor Who, because it's also one of the sort of my academic professional interests and how that overlaps with the show itself. But rather than do that, I thought I'd start at least, possibly finish if I never do another one, by talking about an episode. And this is, as you can see from the cassette, hopefully, if that's close enough, there we are, The Seeds of Doom, which I can remember watching first time round. It is indeed how old I am. It's for any viewers that are unfamiliar with that particular episode, maybe you've never seen that one before. It's one of the classic series. It was aired in 1976 and features Tom Baker and Sarah Jane Smith, Elizabeth Sladen, the actress Sarah Jane Smith, the character, his companion of the time, having a fantastic adventure. I love this episode, which is why I'm talking about it, because there's a lot of people who do podcasts about things that annoy them in the show, and they don't like this, that, or the other about it. So I thought I would do something I do like, something positive. And I can particularly remember this episode, not only because it was a very good episode, but because it links me into various events, unfortunately not very nice events, that were happening in my life at the time, or indeed on the very day one of these particular episodes was airing on a Saturday back in '76. So it kind of brings back, well, I suppose somewhat mixed memories actually of rather unpleasant events, but the show itself was a very good one. Um, so, in summary of what the show is, this episode is about, if for those of you who've never seen it, essentially two seed pods fall through space and crash land into the Arctic an enormously long period of time ago, and remain frozen in the ice for thousands upon thousands of years, until one day an Arctic expedition manages to dig them up. They've sort of crash landed together, as it were, in the ice. And having dug them up, they bring them into their sort of base in the Arctic, and they're conducting experiments. And obviously, they don't know they're alien; they just think they're prehistoric or something. And one of them thaws out and hatches, and it's a sort of a precursor to for those of you who've seen Alien. I know you Ripley and so on. When the alien pod opens and it comes out, and wreaks havoc. It's very kind of reminiscent of that scene. It draws on a lot of imagery and themes and ideas from a film that's been made and remade called The Thing, about a sort of an alien plant-like, well, in the very original version it is plant-like, but in some of the remakes it's, I don't know what the hell you'd call it, just some weird alien thing that lands in the Arctic and then sort of wakes up, comes to life as it were, and starts attacking all the people on the Arctic base and eating them, and it changes shape and it consumes them. The Doctor Who version, obviously not having that kind of a budget, and besides which it was 1976 and a kid show, couldn't go to the extent of, yeah, dismembered heads with legs walking around the set and things that you would have seen in the horror film, the adults-oriented film. But it did push the boundaries. Somebody gets infected, and you can see his arm going greener and greener, and it's sort of turning all lumpy and viney. It's quite interesting for one of the sort of the early stages of this alien creature, which is called the crinoid. If there's a stage where it's sort of basically a man in a costume walking around, they recycled a costume from one of John Pertwee's episodes, and in that episode, that costume had been for an Axon, and it had been a very kind of orangey red colour. So they spray painted it green and called it a Greenoid, which is upcycling, I suppose we'd call that today. Very entertaining. But as the creature gets bigger, it becomes less and less humanoid in shape, and it sort of reverts to this enormous great blob of plant matter that shambles along with no obvious means of propulsion, and is able to animate other plant life. And so you can get ivy and pondweed and things, well, not so much coming to life because they were alive anyway, but becoming animate, moving around, grabbing hold of people and attacking them and doing all sorts of things like that. Again, bit spoiler. Put your fingers in your ears if you want to see the episode without this spoiler. Having dealt with the problem posed by one pod in the Arctic, the other pod is acquired under rather sinister circumstances by an English millionaire, Harrison Chase, who is a sort of, what would we call him, a vegophile, a plant-mad individual, more interested in plants, identifies more strongly, that's very 21st century, isn't it? I identify as a plant. He identifies more strongly with plants than he does with animal life, and he has the second pod shipped back to his mansion house where he intends to conduct his own experiments on it, and needless to say it comes to life and starts causing even more havoc in the English countryside than it did in the Arctic. And eventually, obviously, it gets dealt with at the end of the episode. It's very well done on the budget they had. A few things that are worth noting. The villain, Harrison Chase, was played by Tony Beckley, who's a great actor, who died a few years after the episode was aired, only about 4 years after the episode was aired, died in America. Prolific actor, appeared in loads of things, including The Italian Job, where he played the villainous Camp Freddy. He's quite camp as Harrison Chase too. Well, the actor was gay in real life, but that kind of comes across in Harrison Chase as well. Obviously, being 76, they couldn't be too open about these things with the rules and regulations of TV in that day and age. I imagine if Harrison Chase were to have appeared in an episode within the last few years, he would have been much more overtly, openly gay and named as such. But the character is quite sort of menacing in a somewhat fey fashion. And he has a really quite nasty henchman called Scorby, who is extremely brutal and violent and really rather unpleasant, and meets with a very nasty end. You might somewhat deserved nasty end, which reminds me of an ending of someone who wasn't that nasty actually, but a character in a Stephen King short. In one of his Creepshow episodes that was made of a group of teenagers, American teenagers, who go swimming by the lake and encounter the monster that is in the lake, which proceeds to eat the entire lot of them one by one, stretched out over 15-20-minute episode in this anthology. And one of the characters, when he is consumed, is very reminiscent of what happens to Scorby in his final seconds on screen. I think toss-ups between different villains in the history of the series as to who was the most sinister and most unpleasant. There are characters, one of the ones from Peter Davison's era, in the Caves of Androzani, a particularly slimy, horrible politician who possibly has the edge on Harrison Chase. But Chase has to be up there as one of the better, well-characterised villains, as a one-off villain, setting aside characters like Davros who appear and reappear and the Master and so on. But as a one-off baddie, Harrison Chase is one of the better ones, and that's down to the quality of the acting as well as the script writing, which is something I suspect, without wishing to get too controversial, let's say current Doctor Who showmakers would do well to bear in mind. Quality of script and quality of acting does make a hell of a big difference. Speaking of quality of acting, there's another character in there who is absolutely lovely and fantastic. Miss Amelia Ducat, who is an artist who specialises in botanical pictures, sort of illustrations of plants, the kind of things that appear in gardeners' journals and that sort of thing, gardening books, and get exhibited in museums and galleries and places like that. She's this eccentric old lady. The actress was in her mid-60s at the time, a lady called Sylvia Coleridge. Brilliant actress, again, very, very talented actress. And she does Barnaby extremely well. She comes into it as the Doctor's kind of trying to track down what's going on and who this Harrison Chase is and all the rest of it. And she helps the Doctor and Sarah Jane to infiltrate the Mansion House. And she's kind of like almost takes on a sort of slightly geriatric James Bond kind of a role as she's infiltrating and wheedling her way in, all the while pretending to be this potty old lady, which she is a potty old lady, but she's kind of hamming it up for all it's worth in order to spy upon Harrison Chase. Tom Baker, in one of the commentaries he did on a different DVD, says that he was so taken with Sylvia Coleridge's performance and this kind of potty old lady character that she put on, that he tried to convince the producer of the show at the time to have Amelia Ducat as a companion for the Doctor, because she lives to the end of the episode. She survives quite happily, so that she would come back and become a companion in the TARDIS. And I think that is a wonderful idea, and it's a great shame. One of the sort of losses in Doctor Who history is that they never went for that idea. I don't know if that's because the producer just didn't like it, or maybe the actress was already booked doing other things and couldn't spare the time, or whatever. But wouldn't that be wonderful to have a genuinely potty old lady, a real kind of Margaret Rutherford type character coming into the TARDIS as a companion to the Doctor, rather maybe not necessarily instead of the glamorous young females, which are the staple of Doctor Who, in terms of companions, but maybe as well as rather than instead of. But certainly someone who is there because they are highly entertaining and intelligent and eccentric and maybe a little bit bombastic, someone who doesn't take no for an answer and really kind of goes in there swinging with a handbag and walking stick. It's got to be done at some point in a few years down the line in the future in Doctor Who. Hopefully we're all still here. They should have a companion like that, of someone. It's a shame Elizabeth Spriggs, the actress Elizabeth Spriggs, is no longer with us, because she would have been brilliant in that sort of a part. But whatever the elderly actresses are of a few years' time, maybe one of them could be prevailed upon to play that sort of a role as a companion to the Doctor. It's part of season 13, that's the other thing I just wanted to briefly mention, which includes some of the best episodes, I think, in the history of Doctor Who. Much of that is down to the brilliance of the script writing. They drew their inspiration from a lot of sort of gothic literature and horror movies and things like that, and worked them into a way that was palatable for what was essentially still very much a children's show at the time. Still is, I suppose. But they took those ideas, things like the brain of Morbius and the Frankenstein story and so on, and they really worked with them, and they made really memorable episodes, which even though from this distance of years, and obviously you can look back and say, well, the budget was not brilliant, and some of the special effects are really very clunky, and you can see the sets wobbling and all that sort of thing. But that's the charm of Doctor Who. It was then, and it remains so now for those of us of an age to have seen all those episodes first time around. And I'm sure there must be younger viewers who've only seen them on DVD or Gold Channel and things like that, where they repeat old episodes. But younger generations can fall in love with those clunky, wobbly set old episodes as well, and see the ingenuity at play when they didn't have a ton of money to blow on special effects. So instead they spent it on really good costumes, which I think is something that perhaps has quite gone away to an extent with New Who. The costumes aren't really that inventive anymore. You get people on space stations in the year 5 million, all in jeans and t-shirts, and it's all very boring because they've blown the budget on special effects, and so there's probably nothing left to spend on costumes. We don't expect everyone to walk around in Baker foil outfits like some sort of Space 1999 effort, but they could be more inventive on that front the way they used to be back in the good old days of nostalgia. That's a little bit of a moan, isn't it? I should be focusing on the positives, and I said I would focus on the positives. But that's one of the reasons why I love Seeds of Doom. It surprises me they've never brought back the crinoid, particularly in the last few decades when ecology and environmentalism has resurged to the front as an enormously topical issue, and vegetarianism and veganism and things like that. They could get some real mileage out of the crinoid and working with modern themes. The way, let's say, in the episode The Poisoned Skies, when the Satarans were using their weird cars that they had designed and sold to the public, or at least one of their pawns had designed and sold to the public, which were releasing poison gas, and that kind of keyed into all their concerns about air pollution and exhaust fumes from cars and so on. Doctor Who is very good at taking those sorts of concerns, current popular concerns, and working them in very subtly in a fictionalised way, or at least it used to be like that before it got all a bit sort of as subtle as a brick, which it is at the moment. But hopefully one day we'll go back to that kind of subtlety and metaphor that used to be found in Doctor Who. And so I think they should bring back the crinoid at some point in the next few years, and deal with environmentalism and issues around that, and through the medium, through the imagery of this gigantic plant monster that hates all animal life and just wants to eat everything in sight. Would be fantastic. Yes, so I'll leave that one there, but if you haven't seen it, do see it. It's a really good episode, really worth buying, and at some point I must get one of those little, what do you call, I can't forget the name of the company, but they do the little models, little metal models, that are very detailed, but one of a crinoid to go. I've got an Ice Warrior and a Dalek and various other things around the house. I'd like to get one of those as well at some point. But yes, enjoyable, and if anyone does express an interest in this review, then I will do other Doctor Who things in the future, and if nobody does, then it'll be a one-off thing, and we'll leave it at that. But there we go. Thank you.